So welcome everybody. We are extremely grateful for all of you that have come here this week to participate, share and learn over the coming days. Most of us have travelled from afar, and so a singular land acknowledgement does not truly capture the richness of the distribution across the many locations of Canada and around the world. As we know, there are very few places on this beautiful earth that somebody before us has not called home. Our panelists today have shared a different land acknowledgement with me to share with you today, so I'm not well versed in it, so please forgive me with how I pronounce things, but we would like to acknowledge, We would like to acknowledge that we are in the Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, first signed with the British Crown in 1726. The treaties did not deal with surrender of lands and resources, but in fact recognized title and established the rules for what was going to be an ongoing relationship between nations. Additionally, we would like to acknowledge that within Nova Scotia, people of African ancestry settled and contributed to the building of many formative developments, particularly in the 18th and 19th centuries. This includes the Black Loyalists who fought on the side of Britain during the American War of Independence, the Maroons who fought and never surrendered to the Spanish and British in Jamaica, and Southern American Black refugees who fought on the side of the British during the War of 1812. Today's session is to navigate ways that we can adapt and tailor responses to the diversity of youth we are serving. The innovations being shown today when working across systems and within communities offer insight into how we can orient our work to best support youth in our communities. We need examples of how to do this in order to invest in innovative evidence-based models and approaches that serve diverse youth at risk or experiencing homelessness. This session today is presented by the Home Depot Canada Foundation, and I'd like to take a moment to express our gratitude to them for their continued support in preventing youth homelessness. I'd like to welcome our panel of presenters. First, we have Russ Sanchez, did I say that right?
You did.
From Portal Youth Outreach Association, who will present on unlocking collaborative pathways to end rural homelessness. Next, we will have Danny Mills from Our Pure Place presenting on youth homelessness and sexual exploitation interventions and prevention. And lastly, Heather O'Keefe, my friend from Stepstones for Youth, will be presenting on preventing and ending homelessness for youth from foster care, program design requirements to meet the needs of this unique population. I did check with our panelists. We're going to do all presentations first, and then we'll do 30 minutes of question and answers afterwards. And so you'll see me soon.
Yeah.
Just removing my step stool.
It's the first time I wasn't the shortest person in the room, so that was kind of fun. Okay, I've got two computers to click over. Am I on the right screens? Yes. So, good afternoon. Glad you're with us. We did arm wrestle a little bit for who would go first, and but there's going to be hopefully a good thread that goes through all three of our little workshops. And if you see me making eye contact, it's because my friend here is going to tell me when 15 minutes is up, so that then I can wrap things up. I'm going to give you a picture of rural homelessness for youth, and I can say that when you're thinking about collaborative practices and thinking about working together, the reality in rural, I'm going to say Nova Scotia, but everything I say about Nova Scotia applies, I think, to the rest of the country. And that's the reality that you have no choice but to work together. So it creates the need to be innovative and creative. But I would ask this question of ourselves, is do you really believe that your collective actions are the best practices for the best outcomes for your youth? And would the youth feel the same? And, this is going to be weird to use too, so I'm going to get rid of one. I had my iPad all set with my notes, and then didn't I leave it at home? At the end of the day, years later, are they thriving in that community? Are they thriving and not just surviving? We've had the luxury in our location that we've been around not a long time, but 12 years, but we get to interact with some of the youth that came to us when they were young. So they come back years later and they can reflect back on what was it that made a difference? What was it about that relational bridge? What was it about working together that now they see the fruit of that work, and we can see the changes or not, the same continued struggles, but there's no barrier to them coming back, so we have that benefit. And so this is why I thought of this question. At the end of the day, are they thriving, and do they believe that they're thriving as well, is, I think, a real question. So in painting a picture of youth homelessness, I wanted to tell you a few stories. And you can probably relate to these stories if you're living in the sector. And so the first story depicts that young man at the top there. And I don't think I gave him an imaginary name, but as typical, the call came on a Friday night or a Friday afternoon at 5 p.m. The young man, his mom and boyfriend got kicked out of their house. They had 19 cats, and the mom and the boyfriend and the boy, who is 15, 16, and his girlfriend lived there, but they were boarding in a home. So there was a conflict that ensued, and they were told to leave. So, given it was Friday at 5, and I'm trying to have good work-life balance and things like that, we arranged to go the next morning at 9 a.m. on a Saturday. We got there at 9 a.m. The police had already been there, and child welfare had already been there, and the SPCA had taken the 19 cats and packed them away. So when we arrived, myself and a young man that was a peer support worker for the youth we worked with, when we arrived, the 2 kids were still there. And they were essentially on their own. And this was Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. So anyway, the family ended up going to the woods nearby. They took their belongings, headed to the woods. And the picture of what I'm going to now unravel gives you a picture of youth homelessness. Because it was the following Monday, 2 days later, they got the basics, so they survived the weekend. I'm on the phone with Community Services, made the call for them, and I said, we need to get this family on income assistance. They're living in the woods. We want to get them housed. Well, we could do it over the phone. I said, no, you don't understand. The mom has a hearing problem. She's partially blind, and she's got mobility issues. Because at first they said she could come in. I said, that's not possible. And they don't have a car. Well, we could do it over the phone. I said, no, you don't understand. The house they left had the hearing adaptation on their phone. They don't have that anymore. So they were stumped, this DCS worker. This was about 10 years ago. No phone, no car, no mobility, and no ability to speak on the phone. So I said, you'll have to come to the woods with me. Of course, the DCS worker's like, what? And that was sort of unheard of back then. And what I think's happened over the years is because the reality was we were going to take them to the woods with us by having them on the phone with us and interviewing the couple at the tent, because getting her in the car and getting her to town was going to be a challenge and things like that. So anyway, that's what happened. So that's a bit of a picture. This young man fed his family by snaring rabbits and fishing for the 3 to 4 months that they were there in the woods. So that's story number 1. Story number 2, which some of you are also familiar with, is the 17-year-old that's on the couch. The 4th couch, a lot less safe than the first couch. The first couch is with friends. The 4th couch is not with friends. It's with strangers. And that's another picture of youth homelessness. See, right now there's quite an intensity around housing in Nova Scotia, because in Halifax you see the tents, you see the homelessness, but in rural Nova Scotia you don't see it. There's now tents for the first time, but it's not like there's been homelessness for the first time, and it's certainly not like there's not been couch surfing and sheds and tents and forts and things like that, but seldom visible. The only addictions treatment program in Annapolis Valley is 2.5 hours away by bus. And when the worker says, yeah, they can come to the program, we'll do an intake. And I'm like, no, like you're expecting them to take the bus 2.5 hours to your day program and then 2.5 hours back? I said, that's not going to happen. Well, they could live in the community. I said, there's no housing in the community. So the gap, what we've seen in rural Nova Scotia between the folks that are supposed to be providing the services and the folks like us that have these deep, ongoing, long-term relationships is a big chasm. I would say that the chasm has shortened over the years, and I would say it's because, and I'm proud to say, that that's probably the question our community's been asking for the last 10 years. It's not what barriers do the youth have, but what barriers does our community have? And what are we going to do to reduce the barriers in our community? Not just the barriers per youth, but the barriers in the community. Transportation, when we're running a summer program, the province who will fund that summer program for us are surprised but supportive because we'll spend $4,000 just on transportation. And it's only a budget of maybe $20,000, but $4,000 of it is on transportation, and that's the reality. And so that's just one of those barriers we have to overcome. And additionally, how will we work together? The first time 10, 12 years ago, I went into legal aid or the courthouse or mental health and addictions, it was always like, who are you? And so gradually more and more as our staff and myself showed up in places to advocate and be there for young people, there's not a question anymore. It's normal for advocacy to happen. It's normal for them not to be introduced to somebody by their title or their role, but just, hey, this is someone I know and I've been working with for a while and da-da-da-da. So if ever we wonder, can trust be borrowed? Can trust be lended? Absolutely it can. But it depends on how we do those introductions and how we do those work. In fact, more and more, and some of my staff are in the room, so I'm going to be challenged on some of the things I say today, but more and more I'd like us not to use the words like referral. Like referral is an adult word. It's not really a youth word. But rather, let's go over here and work with this person. Let me introduce you to somebody. Let's go do this together. And so when you get rid of the word referral, maybe it just makes it a little bit more friendly and a little bit more relational. And maybe it makes a bit more sense to that young person. Things like intake. A young person needs to go through an intake without feeling like it's an intake, that it's a conversation. And when we adopt those practices, I think what happens is the partners we work with begin to, I would say, do their work differently as well. I'm going to skip that, and I'm going to bring us down to, it's basically what that says, and I'm hoping that my stories will illustrate some of this. Jay was breaking into cars and selling drugs. He was arrested and charged with trafficking. He was charismatic and influential with his peers. In fact, our first very successful summer program was all the kids he told had to be there. Little did we know he was telling those kids to also sell drugs for him on the side, but the attendance was superb because that's where they usually picked up their marijuana to go sell later on after the program. But nonetheless, it was working because he was sort of like the Pied Piper and the kids followed and came. By the end of the summer, though, he saw that he doesn't need to make money by selling drugs. He could actually be paid as a peer support worker, and he saw the impact of just those kids being in the room together doing a program. But the reason I wanted to tell his story is, though he was successful at selling drugs and all of that, a lot of the workers in town said forget about him. He'd been in and out of the youth center probably 25 times. And his probation officer said, you're going back to Waterville unless you go work with Russ and go to the portal and get the support they need. And so, in fact, the probation order was so specific, and it's like, this is my ally, my partner in the community, so they wrote it specific in the courtroom, and it said he can go to the portal or be with Russ anytime or attend programs at the portal, and that's it. Because he had an anklet and he had a device on his fridge. And so he was kind of stuck with us. And in one of my early conversations, I said, who showed you value when you were a kid? Who spoke of your worth? He said, my probation officer. Didn't say it was an uncle, didn't say it was a teacher, certainly didn't say it was his parents. It was his probation officer, so that was shocking. But that trust that he had for his probation officer was extended and loaned to me when he said, you go to the portal, you get help, and we won't send you to jail. And that's what made the difference, is that trust was extended. Another story, that was Jay. Tom, another young man struggling with addictions and mental health, too much for their family, and many of us in this room have seen that. Last winter, they were living in a shed in Kentville. Now they're in our supportive living program. It's not without its bumps. They love to work and build things. However, alcohol and drugs have been used many, many times over the years to self-medicate. And they've lost and seen the destruction of all of their significant relationships and any semblance of community. So our community becomes their community. So that's that relational bridge that is so, so important. So we need to create community in our communities and wrap that community around the very people we're reaching out to. So trust can be loaned and community can be built to wrap around them. Now we promised as part of this workshop that I would give, and it's in the notes on your app, and if you don't know how to use that, there's these 4 things that I put into that handout, and it probably just elaborates on these 4 things. And I'm just going to highlight those things as a way to sort of wrap up and park this. And if you have any questions for me at the end of the 3 workshops or the 3 input sessions, you can ask those questions. But building sincere bridges. We've seen over the last 10 years, whoever has the most emotional and relational equity, they take the lead. We've cared less about whether it's the social worker, whether it's the income assistance worker, whether it's the addictions worker, but the person that has the best emotional equity and the investment and the trust, they take the lead for the case conferencing, or they take the lead to get the young person to the meeting. Where do they feel the safest? Meet them there. The first time we asked DCS to come over and do an intake for child welfare at our building, they were like, well, we can't do that. I'm like, well, why can't you? Well, now they can, and they do it quite often and quite regularly, and I'd like to see more of it. Who do I know and who do I trust? When we started to build our collaborative case management team, see, in rural Nova Scotia, it's not like working with the hospital in Halifax, the IWK, where they have all this multi-disciplines all in one team, and they can identify the social worker, the OT, the psychologist, all of this in one team. We're on a Zoom call with them, and it's like, no, there's just 2 of us. We don't have a rec therapist. We don't have an addictions counselor. It's just the 2 of us. And so the reality is, who do I trust? Who are the partners that have a relational approach? And let's get them around the table and make a difference. And that's what we've seen happen. Most of our youth don't know who's a social worker, who's not, whose title is what. It doesn't matter to them. So that probably brings me to that next point. It's just people working with people. No titles on doors. Use my office, go there. If we have a space that somebody else can use, let them use it. And that's what's happened over time. And now we're launching a new program targeted towards African Nova Scotians. It can be a family resource center, a youth outreach program. Who has the funds? Who has the people? Who have the space? It doesn't matter that much. To reach the folks we need to reach and to provide a safe, loving atmosphere for them to connect, we need to forget about who owns what and who's got what title. It's just people with people. So we've seen ourselves bring as many of those services into the community and wrapping around those youth as possible, and not expecting the youth to go. I mean, why our mental health and addiction support service is only reachable by bus is beyond me, but it's had barriers from the get-go, and you don't make your 3rd appointment, you're out. And so we just do everything possible to make sure that we don't mirror that at all. We don't criticize our partners. We don't say negative things about them to the youth we work with. It's not the frontline staff, it's the systems. But once the frontline staff are in the door and they're working with us, it's always a positive experience. Building the team of like-minded individuals. I think I've kind of touched on that. You'll find more in my handout. And then I think the last part is what's key. Let's not just talk about working together, but let's actually work together. I'll tell you, I'll wrap up with this story. This young person was blowing up their housing. Blowing it up. She used to be under the care of a social worker. So I was thinking very pragmatically and kind of abrupt, and I said, okay, we just got to evict her. And the social worker looked over at me, no longer working with the youth. She goes, you can't do that. No. She's sitting across the table, and we're all there together, professionals, and she goes, no, you're not doing that. She had enough ownership over this kid's life to say no to me. It's no longer her client. She doesn't have any responsibility, but she just said no. And are we going to listen to that no from one another? In fact, when our supportive living program is landing in the valley, I remember people in government and outside of government calling it our program. I want to maintain that. I want to keep that. How do they have the same ownership over something they don't own and they don't run, but they call it our program? And when we have that kind of collaboration happening, I think the outcomes for youth are really great. The province that keeps awarding us certain funds to administer in certain programs because they see us supporting other agencies. So sometimes there's this one worker, she drives me a bit crazy because every case she pleads, oh, this family's really trying, they're really having difficulties, we need to pay their damage deposit. I love her heart, but I keep saying, look, we hold the fund, but you make the decision. If you feel like that $1,000 is worthwhile, you say yes. I'm not gonna control it and approve it. Let's just have you make that decision. We'll just pay the bill. And if that illustrates the kind of spirit of camaraderie and collaboration that I'm promoting, then so be it. Wrapping up, my partner and I, who now works for us, she used to work for Canadian Mental Health. It sort of sums it up. We hopped in the car together. We drove through the first field, past the second cornfield, up the fire road, brought all the papers, got them to sign it all. Then Candy brought it back into DCS. We got them an income assistance, and eventually we found a house, and we housed them. They didn't have any cats when they started. 2 years later, they had 4 more cats, a 5th on the way, and a dog, and another kid, and it continued on. But it was a pleasure to do that, and now she's actually working for our agency doing some similar work. But that kind of action of going to the woods was in her DNA and my DNA. And we told that stories and challenged DCS. And now, you know what a lot of those agencies do? I wouldn't say they go to the woods. Well, they'll definitely come to the community center. They'll definitely come to the youth center. They'll definitely do that interview. They'll definitely piggyback on the relational work and the bridge that we built. So that's worthwhile. Thank you.
I don't have my step stool. Thank you. I need your help. I don't know how to do this. Okay. And Danny.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Okay, thank you, Russ. Danny is going to join us now and share with us youth homelessness and sexual exploitation interventions and prevention.
I might need your step stool.
Oh, I almost brought it to her.
I'm just joking. So. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm going to talk about the intersectionalities and some of the interventions and preventions we are doing over in Peel Region. And it worked. We've done acknowledgements. So a little bit about Our Place Peel. So we're a youth serving organization in Peel Region, Ontario, which is right next to Toronto, as Toronto is the landmark for Ontario. Approximately 1.5 million residents, and today, these are our various programs, but today I'm going to highlight the intersectionalities and the work that we're doing between shelter and our anti-human trafficking efforts. So as many of you may know, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this, there's a significant amount of intersectionality for youth experiencing homelessness. They're not only at an increased risk of exploitation, but they're specifically targeted for that vulnerability and risk. So items that highlight those vulnerabilities are no fixed address, limited restriction or interactions, no expected routine or a very expected routine, a lot of transiency, no one following up if they leave one shelter and go to another, bed unused as many times, limited education or limited access to education, little to no money, trauma, maltreatment, and abuse from their previous circumstances, and a lack of trust in systems that the individual has. And as well as, like I said, the trauma and abuse one has been through not only in systems, but currently in their circumstances. Homelessness is a trauma. They're out seeking connection and family. If any of you work within the shelter environment, you know that they are best friends with someone within 30 seconds in that environment. The relatability to peers is a significant factor. There's potentially substance use or misuse. Age is a major factor, gender, orientation, and expression within the 2S LGBT community and non-binary, as well as race, ethnicity, and exiting systems. So whether it's child welfare, criminal justice system, all of these, unfortunately, could actually be one individual right, in terms of the intersectionalities. So, intervention. So without collaboration, which we just heard a significant amount of information about, and collective will, nothing's going to be possible. Traditionally, even in our own community, working within silos was a historical nature, and it seems that way for many communities. And now the emphasis on collaboration and working together and putting we've always done client-centered work, but we didn't know how to do it within navigating larger systems and working together because funders, although I believe some of mine are in the room, it was traditionally a fight for each of us going against organizations to get the same funding in order to run the programs, right? So in 2015, our community came together and created it's called the Peel Human Trafficking Service Provider Committee, being able to get over 40 organizations around the table to talk about the intersectionalities and concerns that we were having in our community regarding sexual exploitation. And I should note that I'm specifically speaking about sexual exploitation. I do understand that labor exploitation is a major intersectionality as well, but I'm just highlighting the one for today. And we were able to develop everything that ended up being a precursor to what I'll talk about today, but really the community partners coming together, recognizing trends, what we were seeing in our community and the effects of trafficking. And I was at the table representing one shelter at the time, and now fast forward many years, 8 years, and we've got full continuum of care and strategy wrapped around.
Awesome.
So just quickly to highlight the Region of Peel's work in our community. So the prevention, intervention, and exits in housing is the 3-pillar strategy as a part of the anti-human trafficking framework for the Region of Peel. And the program that our organization is operational lead of, it's a collaborative program, is called Encourage. And I put it across the bottom as we act as a continuum of care across all 3 pillars, but we do fall under and highlight the intervention pillar. Prevention, it's the community work that we're doing, the service provider table I was talking about, among other efforts. And then the exits in housing, we have a safe house and transitional house in our community as well. So a little bit about Encourage. Our efforts are to provide wraparound integrated services in a central location for victim survivors and individuals at risk. Although our organization serves 16 to 24 within the youth homelessness side, Encourage serves the ages 12 up. So we see anyone duly noted as children, as well as youth and adults. This provides us the opportunity to really wrap around them at a young age from a preventative measure as well, all the way through their healing journey. So Encourage really focuses on increasing access to dedicated supports and services together with our community collaboratives and our collaborative partner, eFry Hope and Help for Women. We're able to keep the client centered in the work that we do and recognize that dedicated services and supports for victims and survivors of human trafficking need those dedicated supports. They need someone resilient by their side, walking with them on their healing journey. We provide trauma-informed care, culturally competent, and humility in working with our clients. Choice, I could probably go on for days about what choice is in the world of victims and survivors. We have no barriers to our program. We'll meet the individual where they're at and take a holistic approach to the dedicated care. It's also really important to have that dedicated and highly trained staff team, recognizing the various intersectionalities an individual can face, violence cycle, as well as the continuum of care when it comes to sexual exploitation and choice getting into sex work, which is a whole nother conversation, not for today. So this is our safe space. This is the Encourage Hub. Just to give a little depiction, we have all our art and work. It's not actually one piece of art there that you can see, but there's more artwork. All our art, I swear there's more, but is completed by current, at the time, current individuals residing in our safe and transitional programs that we have access to. We pay them as an artist, and they have provided us with pieces of work for hope and inspiration and empowerment within our location. We have a full medical ensuite. The purpose of Encourage is to have individuals come have all their dedicated supports meet them where they're at. So although we are a location, we get the individual safely to our location, and then we have the service providers come to us. So not sending the client, Peel's massive, it's 3 cities, or will be, and is just too large to navigate, right? So being able to have one central location where we can get the individual safely to us and be able to provide all the wraparound supports, their case management, they attend court, the doctors can see them, everything. You name it, we've had it. People come to have their weekly showers off the streets to doing their laundry. So this is our home away from home. So a little bit of data, because that's what it's the good stuff, right? So just year over year, our numbers in regards to 3 years into the project, and then year to September, we have seen 87 new individuals. We currently have well over 65 organizations. I use the word referral, sorry. Number of different referrals that we've made to various organizations. We're seeing approximately on average 14 new victims and survivors per month. And then we have over 85 different organizations with built out dedicated referrals and pathways. When we first started in 2020 and started taking on the client load PS, opening a program during the pandemic, and trying to do virtual with victims and survivors was a whole nother, so you can understand why the number was slightly lower and we continue to see growth. However, out of that 67, I knew all but 7 from working in the shelters. So it shows the correlation there. Just a quick note that we have a 24-hour response, and we do this through our partners. So it's not your typical 9 to 5. We have a complete program wraparound through our victim services, our Peel Regional Police, their vice unit, and everything comes right back to Encourage so that we can pick up from where individuals left off, whether it's a 2 a.m. response. And we're currently working as a community on an effective emergency bed strategy to address exactly that, whether it's child welfare holds in the middle of the night, and removals versus vice finding an individual at 2:30 in the morning and not having to sit in the police station. Although we'll go to them even if it's 2:30 in the morning, it's still nicer to come to a specific location or a bed. So the correlation to shelter, we operate Peel's 2 dedicated youth shelters plus an overflow site, so it's approximately 120 beds in total. One of the things that we've done internally as an organization to increase shelter safety is, one, before all of this existed, and it's snowing. It's literally snowing. Sorry, squirrel. That's my moment. I was not expecting that. Is recognizing that we can't turn a blind eye to the fact that, we all love our programs, we love the shelters we operate and so forth. However, it's happening, right? It's targeted to us. There's a purpose of why they come to shelters. So you can't turn a blind eye to it. You have to hit it head on, right? So we, since 2015, had already been doing the prevention efforts and so forth. So now, with all of these dedicated supports and services, we're able to get out there and do even more impactful work and really ground staff in the recognition and the signs, right? So training staff, we do this internally as an organization on a quarterly basis. So we get all new staff as well as take a deeper dive to trauma and the impacts. And then recommendation is don't stockpile. If you can have a program that has individual rooms, advocate that through and through. A lot of individuals think, well, even if it's just one roommate, females recruit females, males recruit males, non-binary, it's everything, right? So you can't necessarily always pair them up with the perfect roommate. But I do understand that sometimes it's just a funding issue, and that's the building we have and so forth. So there are steps that you can take to mitigate those factors. Client-centered and trauma-informed, we all say this, but do we do it? And we can label it as an organization, but you have to really get into the nitty-gritty and the tough conversations with your staff to recognize, I've been entrenched in this work for I don't know how long now, and having to have hard conversations with staff that they think it's chosen sex work. It is not, right? So really, that's a personal biases, and how do we separate that when we come into work? And is this the environment? Because I can't put you in front of a victim or survivor to do the work. Privacy, we have a lot of ad hoc conversations within our environment, and if that individual is either being recruited or is currently a victim, there are ears on them 24/7 in that shelter. There is someone placed in the shelter to keep an eye on these people posing as homeless, right? So there's the understanding that we can't be naive to the fact that this is occurring. And that's when I usually get questioned on a lot, but that's a fact. Responsive protocols. So you really have to build out protocols that meet the individuals where they're at. Push back and rustle feathers on, discharge at 3 a.m. if they don't return. They leave on a Saturday but always come back on a Sunday. We have to get to know our clients, relationship-based. You have to be able to understand the transiency of which a trafficker will make happen in order to keep them hit and miss so they don't have relationships, so you can't see the pattern, right? So being able to have response protocols and safety plans for individuals that you have high risks and concerns for. And educate the youth. One of the biggest things that I come across is no one's talking about it in the shelter, but you have to talk about it. You have to address it. You have to make those that are there for the wrong reasons uncomfortable and realize oh, they know what they're talking about and they're privy to this, and it's this awkward game in essence, right? But you have to educate. You can still be a safe space and a safe place for youth to go, but you have to be able to hit it head on. Where are we? So opportunities are continued. Like I said, training the staff. We have to see the patterns, the behaviors, the signs. This is all relationship-based. No one staff can have a group of youth that they are more drawn to or so forth. We understand the youth might be drawn to staff, but all staff have to have relationships with all youth. You can't pick and choose. We talk about favoritism and things like that. At the end of the day, if you're on shift and you only know a core group of youth, you have to be able to know everybody by name and at least their baseline to really start to pick up on some of the signs and concerns. Client-centered, trauma-informed, so training, policies, relationship-based case management, resiliency, and recognizing that it takes 7 attempts on average to exit a trafficking situation, and you will be their punching bag all 7 times. So choice and trust, I can't emphasize this enough. There's no reason to trust you. You're a part of the system. You're potentially a part of the problem. We've had, you look at officers who may respond to something. We've had victims that have been forced to have relations with off-duty officers, and you never know who they're coming across. So you have to be very, very aware of the interactions that the victim or survivor may have had in their past and meet them where they're at. And choice. One of the most impactful stories I ever heard was from a survivor and who does international trainings, Timmy and Eggy, and a close friend. And she talks about taking a client to, it was like a Burger King, McDonald's, and it took them 4 hours to decide what to eat, and sat there with them the entire time and allowed for that regaining of choice, and went through tears and tough conversations and all of that. But 4 hours, whereas we're asking them 14 different things in 15 minutes within the shelter environment. So when we start to see that, asking certain questions and they're pulling back or so forth, just how much it's great to offer choice, but it might be too much at once, right? So really understanding who the individual is and scaling it back and starting at a different start point. Responsive protocols. We can't have protocols that, dismiss people for not returning safely to the shelter at a specific time when this is their natural pattern. We have to take a deeper look at our responses, and then prevention programming, like I said, talking about it, recognizing that this is something they could be approached about, and what would they do in that situation. This goes as far as even some of our young men being approached to get girls to come out to a party. They unwillingly don't know that they just got paid $50 to get girls showing up to be recruited. So it's the education goes through and through to everyone. And then housing first, the pillars, I think, are just a fantastic starting point for groundwork for working with youth in housing. And also recognizing that if they're entrenched in it and they haven't safely exited, their housing will be taken over. So we are constantly looking for housing for individuals. And the hardest thing is to house someone who needs further supports to even exit in the first place. And that can be done, and I will note, it can be done without police. If they choose not to have police, there are interventions to support. It's their choice. And then, perfect, it's my last slide. We're good. So, community response protocols. So really pushing your community to have, a dedicated pathway for like-minded individuals to come together and do the work. If you're not working with other shelters on this, you have to get to the table, you have to start talking to them. Like I said, that awkwardness of there's that shelter, they house them, and we do that. You got to be a cohesive network. The reason I knew all but a few of those first 68 was from operating shelters for years, right? And recognizing and building a relationship with them. You have to have a 24-hour response. It can't just end. We can't be a 9-to-5 response to this issue. You have to have collaborative partners. I have a lot of people that have concerns when police get involved, but police need to be at the table for the side of when you need enforcement, right? So there's give and take, and recognizing your role when you're a partner coming to the table. Dedicated care paths. That's not just, hey, we have this program, go ahead and get them on a wait list. This is completely different dedicated care path that I'll find a side door, back door, window, I'm gonna get them in. So, and then coordinated system, that dedicated coalition or committee, and really wraparound and aftercare supports. Our Encourage offers the triage and the immediate risk assessment, safety assessment, everything through and through. And then we have long-term case management that stays with them as long as they need it. Thank you.
Well, she's done half of my job for me, so it's okay.
That's our program today.
That was great.
It's like, it really started snowing.
I know. I started being struck
Couldn't
by
help
the snow. But it'll be different everywhere
friend Heather.
across the province. What's that? Because they're so close to the ocean.
Yeah.
Hi,
home?
everyone.
Could we
My name is
say-
Heather. I'm the Executive Director of Stepstones for Youth. I'm going to be talking today a little bit about foster care and the sort of the transition into homelessness and how that happens, and then hopefully be able to provide some ideas around some interventions that can support young people from the foster care system to do better in our system, so in the community settings. So just to go through, oh, that's the name of the presentation. All right. This is what we're going to talk about. Great. Okay. So just really quickly to go over some of the information. In Canada, we have 63,000 kids at any given time in the foster care system. Of those kids, many of those young people are going to end up in the shelter system. And so today I just want to talk a little bit about how the system, how the experience for a young person in the foster care system is fairly unique, and therefore the approach has to be also unique in working with the intervention. So young people from foster care are generally very isolated. So they're very isolated. Many of the young people have not finished high school. Most of the young people lack unpaid support people in their life, which is relevant. We're just going to have a flashing system here. Just make sure everybody's paying attention. All right. And I can just keep talking and maybe we'll figure this out. But anyways, a lot of people talk about kids in the foster care lacking skills, right? And we're going to talk very briefly about that in the presentation, but I want to focus on the other pieces of what generally is the experience of young people from foster care. Keep in mind, everything I'm saying is generalizations, right? Not everybody from foster care has had the exact same experience. When you enter foster care versus how long you've been in foster care, all of that impacts your experiences. But this is generally speaking what most young people will tell you. Most of the young people also distrust systems. This is a critical part to working with a young person because other people who haven't experienced foster care may actually trust the system or trust the help that you're providing, whereas a lot of kids who've experienced the foster care system actually don't trust any of the help that is being provided, and for good reason, because generally those systems have actually hurt them through that process. Statistically speaking, young people in foster care move once every year that they're in foster care. So you can imagine how this disrupts their education, their home life, their ability to make connections, their ability to attach, their ability to have friends, to engage in. Is it still flashing? Okay. We can turn
It's
it
animated.
on. Animated. Is that driving you guys crazy? Is that? Yes. We've got some yeses. Okay, you're welcome to just close your eyes during this presentation. Just don't fall asleep, because I'm gonna feel really
That's
bad.
embarrassing.
That's embarrassing.
Seems
These guys are gonna make fun of me if you all fall asleep during this presentation. Okay, so don't do that. Okay, but another factor is that a lot of young people have had broken relationships. So people in the service industry, so people who are tried to support them, or social service industry, who have tried to support them have let them down, right? Have let them down over and over and over again. Adults generally have let young people down over and over and over again. So when a young person presents to you in the first time in the shelter system or wherever they're presenting for the first time, you have to kind of understand that that's been their experience long term, and that really impacts the way in which they're going to receive service from you. And as most people know, in most provinces, young people are kicked out of the foster care system at the age of 18. So yes, there's new interventions, and there's lots of different things that people say that that are happening, and there's also a lot of marketing that goes around. You'll hear in your province maybe kids are provided care until 21 or provided care until 25. I just want to be really clear with everyone. That is not necessarily actually in foster care. It is money, right? So, and there's a big difference in my mind about what care is and what money is, and the impact of that. So in your province, wherever you're from, I would say most of the time it's 18. I think in BC it's 19.
Nova Scotia 19 too.
Nova Scotia 19, look at that. This is exciting. We're in Nova Scotia. Okay, so that's very exciting, but most places it's very limited, right? And that date is it's a hard cutoff, right? So sometimes there's a transitional period or whatever, but a lot of people fear their 18th birthday or their 19th birthday, depending on where they are. And we know that most of those young people actually end up homeless. So young people from the foster care system are 193 times more likely to become homeless than their peers. We know that around 61% in Ontario, I don't know this stat in Nova Scotia, but 61% of the young people who are on on the streets and homeless are actually from the child protection system. We know also other impacts, right? So we know that young people drop out of high school at alarming rates. Young people are on social assistance at alarming rates, and we know this is, and I think probably people know this information here, but I just wanted to kind of set the stage of why this is an issue. This is. We're getting text support. Is it me? Is it? No? Okay, it's me. Okay. Usually is. Okay. So how does it work? Kids from foster care, they get kicked out at the age of 18 or 19, depending on where you are. Some of the young people leave earlier, right? So they can leave at 16, 17, 18, and they leave for a variety of different reasons. Sometimes it's financial, because they know if they leave, they can get some money, and that sounds exciting when you're 16 years old, right? They go into temporary living arrangements. Sometimes they actually get discharged to the street. There was a child protection agency in Ontario that was handing out tents as a transitional plan from the foster care system. So they're in an institution, they're in the foster home, they're in a group home, and then they end up homeless very quickly. So dropping out of high school, obviously you're going to drop out of high school because you need to work, right? And then very quickly they enter into the homelessness. Similarly, around mental health, there's a trajectory for where you're exposed, as a baby, you're exposed oftentimes, maybe at higher rates. We get exposed to trauma, abuse, violence. There's apprehension, which is a trauma in itself, being ripped away from your family. Sometimes for young people that happens numerous times throughout their life. So they're put back into their home, into their birth home or their original home, and then they're apprehended again, and then they're put back, and then they're apprehended again, and they go from home to home to home, right? That in itself is a trauma, let alone the reason for which they entered care in the first place. They often live in unstable environments. Many young people describe their situation as lacking hope and despair, so that's a big piece for young people. I used to think it was like, that's a side piece, but it seems to be a very important piece that we have to be addressing. And as a result, a lot of young people struggle with mental health. Why is it unique? So you're going to sit here and say, well, yeah, everybody we work with has those things happening to them, right? But why I think this is a very unique population is because for a variety of different reasons. So we have increased transient childhoods, we have institutionalized care, we have paid professionals as guardians. So imagine being raised by people who are being paid. Imagine only knowing adults who are being paid to care for you. Often in our program, we'll hear, why is this person hanging out with me? How much are they being paid? And when we say, well, they're actually not being paid, they're like, well, what's going on? What's the motivation? Because usually that's not a positive for a young person because of their experiences, right? We see really high ACE scores. Everybody's familiar with ACE scores? Yes, okay. Very high ACE scores in comparison to general populations, as well as populations that are in the shelter systems. Adverse mental health, trauma, and distress systems, which we talked about. The interesting thing is that at the beginning, when Stepstone started working with young people from foster care, young people would come and they would say they had no one in their life. What we have learned is that they don't have, many young people from foster care don't have anyone in their life currently, but that does not mean that they don't have people in their life, period, right? So we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but there's few natural support people. They have no one to go to for holidays, celebrations, birthdays, right? And no one. This isn't that you could go to aunt, and aunt is going to, maybe you can't live with aunt. Maybe that's not going to be a solution to homelessness, but aunt will maybe take you out for your birthday, or maybe will even call you, or somebody will text you. Many of these kids don't have any of that. They have no one to call for support, and they, again, lack hope. So. Why is this also important? You all know about ACEs, right? We don't need to go into ACEs. Okay, it affects everybody. Everybody affects behavior. It affects different aspects of your capacity to engage and to attach and to develop in different areas. It affects executive functioning skills. Also, financial implications to something like this. We invest a lot of money into taking care of kids in foster care, and then we see the significant financial implications. And I speak to people all the time who are more interested in the funding side of this. I don't think this is the crowd, but I think it's important for us to remember there's a huge financial implication to not addressing this. And then basically to allowing these young people, and I would say allow these young people to enter into homelessness when it actually could have been prevented to begin with. We know this population is going to likely end up homeless, right? So the one thing I would say today is just to say to you folks is there anything that you could be doing at your place to kind of look at this population prior to entering into the homeless space, right? Because we know they're going to be there anyway, and we all know it's a lot easier to prevent. So from an intervention point of view, I just wanted to go through, this is kind of a funny slide, but just go through our thinking around some of this stuff. Generally speaking, what I would consider logical models or traditional models of intervention would suggest that, if you do one thing, the other thing is going to happen. If you put a financial skills course in place, you're going to get an ability to manage finances better. If you provide, if somebody's struggling with mental health issues, then you put counseling in place, you're going to increase stable mental health. But what we were actually finding at Stepstones when we started our program in 2011, around 2011, to look at the interventions that might work with kids from the foster care system, is that we found that actually these traditional modes of intervention, I suppose you'd say, like these traditional logical intervention techniques weren't actually affecting the change that we were hoping them to affect. And that's why I think it's important for us to and then we started thinking, well, why? Right? Why, if we put these things in that traditionally work, like housing subsidies or education subsidies or any of those things, why were they not creating the effect that we were hoping to? So we started looking at the outcomes, and we were able to identify, so we started sort of the traditional path. We did housing intervention, so we did like housing grants, housing support, housing workers. We didn't have an actually that's not true. We did a semi-independent home with 9 beds as well. And but we still weren't seeing the results that we were hoping to see. And so when we started to look at it, what were the kids, who were the kids that were doing well in our program and who were the ones that weren't? And what we found was that there are 3 key factors, not surprising to anyone, but I think important from an intervention point of view to consider. The 3 key factors were housing, strong support networks, and a sense of belonging. So from a program side of things, it's like, okay, well, so then what do you do about that, right? So if that's the foundation, and then the interventions add to that foundation, but they don't actually work if that foundation is not there, then how do you as a program create those things? And so what we started to look at is how to do that. We looked at some of the research. I'm not going to go through it, but you're welcome to the slides. There's lots of research to suggest that sense of belonging and that sense of and that support network is critical. And we're in an urban setting, so sometimes that can be a little bit more complicated. One of the things, just to put it out there though, is that this idea of creating independence and self-sufficiency seems to be a very prominent concept in the world of transitioning from foster care, right? So let's make some independence. You know, I'm not standing here because I was independent in my life, right? I'm standing here because I was interdependent. But yet a lot of our interventions are about creating independence for young people. And we're like, we're gonna get them independent, we're gonna get them a home, and they're gonna be great. The thing about kids in foster care is you're gonna get them the home and things are not gonna be great, right? We're gonna get them the life skills and the financial classes and the counseling and the physical house, but things are not gonna be great because they have no one in their life. So and when you have no one in your life, there's very little motivation to continue. And we've seen that, unfortunately, and you know, traditionally, you put all the traditional things that you think that you need in place, and the young person still ends up dying or still ends up in very desperate situations. So from a program point of view, what do we do about it? One of the programs, I'm just flipping through quickly so we don't have too much time, but one of the programs that we developed and started to look at a few years ago was our connection building program, previously known as Safe at Home. And what it started to look at is trying to create a format around how do you build these connections? How do you build these support networks for young people? Because all the way along for the last 12 years, 13 years, we've been trying to actually do this, but it's always been that kind of side of the desk sort of thing. It's like, because young people from foster care and everything, it's always the emergency stuff, right? I need housing, I need food, I need whatever it was. And so we were like, you know, you have to focus on connections, and you have to focus on mentorship, and you have to focus on finding family and finding previous family, but it was always on the side. And so what we tried to do is we actually switched gears a little bit. We changed job titles, which was not as effective as I thought it was going to be. We hired for, honestly, I'll go about some of the things, but we hired for those positions to just find connections. This is the only job that these workers were going to be doing, is just finding connections for young people. We still found that the work would end up into that emergency, kind of basic needs, focusing on basic needs. But so what we did was we created a little bit of a model so that workers were very clear about the role of each one. So the first one is you have to build trust. Trust is a critical point of this because young people do not trust you. They do not trust the system. They do not trust adults most of the time. How do you build trust? We'll go over that a little bit. We look at connections work. Is everybody familiar with mobility mapping? No, if we're not, I would suggest you go and check out mobility mapping. It's a very straightforward process. It's basically, think about it as like mapping your life, right? Where were you born? Where was your first school? Where's your second school? Who were those people? In a kid from foster care's life, that's actually very complicated. It's like they were like 7 different schools, 7 different communities, like 75 different foster parents and foster siblings, and you name it, right? Okay. And as a result of that, when you're doing the mobility mapping, it's kind of a fun experience for young people. It's somewhat of a therapeutic experience. It depends on how the young person engages. Usually what we do is we just take a big old long piece of paper and they actually just draw out their life. So I was at this, started born here and then going on. If they don't know, which a lot of young people from foster care don't know their history, then they just put like question mark, house, question mark, not sure, it was blue and red. I think it might have been in this city. You go through that and you work with other people in their life, like their child protection workers, their counselors, anybody, school people, and try to figure it out, like try to actually map it out, and you can actually help them do that. This is a critical step in being able to support a young person, not only to understand who they are and understand the trajectory of their life, but also to understand what are the connections that were broken during that period of time. So a lot of young people from foster care actually have a significant amount of connections. They've just been all broken. And when we go back and we start exploring those connections, we have found a huge success in actually being able to reconnect kids to those connections and have them become part of their natural support network. But this process, we only started that a couple of years ago, and it has been like completely game-changing in terms of getting information. And it's not that hard. Like you're not sitting in front of you going, tell me about your life, and it's, and tell me all the people who you want to be connected to. Because a lot of young people are also scared of these connections because they feel like they've let them down. What we have found is that the connections that the young person has felt that have been let down, sometimes where the system was letting those connections down, right? So they were removed from a foster home. The foster parent actually really wanted to be connected to them. And when we reach back out to that previous foster care provider from 7 years ago, they want to stay involved. They want to be connected. And they might actually want to provide housing in different ways. And so what we have had a lot of success in actually finding housing through this method of looking at the past. Then we look at 50 connections discovered. They don't have to be all good connections. They can be bad connections. We can put red X's on their faces if we want. We can do whatever we want, but we're finding these connections, right? And then we try to uncover 5 connections in their history that may actually be something that could be supportive. They don't all have to be housing. Ideally, we have at least 2 housing options there, meaning that the young person could move in there if they needed to. But we have at least, and then 3 other people who could act as a support person to you. It could be in lots of different ways. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be able to do everything, but we're looking for at least 5 people to be part of their support network. And then, of course, the most complicated and the most important are 5 and 6. And this is the one that most programs fail to add. There's a lot of family finding, reconnecting to, communities and all that kind of, but we see a quick decline of those relationships if we're not supporting the support networks. So then the worker's job really becomes from supporting the young person to supporting the support network, which can be a lot more complicated work, right? But it's absolutely critical, because if we don't do that, we will always be needed, and we will always be in the young person's life. Okay, we got to go faster. All right, so we also provide a bunch of different other things for the support network. Really important to remember that this is for the support network, not just for the young person themselves. And we're not going to go through that. All right, so a few things that I think we've already kind of covered, but something I do want to mention in terms of program design. If you are hoping to do a program similar to this, or try to put it at the front end of a shelter system or any kind of housing intervention, I would strongly encourage you to think about this struggle between the helper and the connector, right? And so a lot of people go into this role to be a helper. They like the helping role, right? The connecting role is a very different role. Connecting is about actually being okay with the fact that you're not going to be the savior, that you're not going to be the one who's always doing everything for something. And that's a kind of a different personality. And so when we're looking at hiring for these roles, it's actually really important that we think about that piece of it. The other piece that I just wanted to mention is refocusing rewarding behavior. So what I noticed with myself is that I would reward staff when they went, above and beyond, and we're out all night with a young person, right? Or helping them to move and, picking up their stuff. And now what we start rewarding staff is around doing things like, the young person had 5 people to help move them and you weren't it. Yeah. That's a reward, right? And so everybody's like, and so internally you actually have to shift the way you're actually rewarding staff, because other staff are listening to that. And that's kind of what you're showing as your value. why does this make sense? It saves you money, it maintains cultural connections, it increases housing supports, it's long-term sustainable change, youth-focused, youth-driven, youth-supported, so the youth drive this process, right? They're deciding who they're connecting with, they're deciding how you connect with those people, how we help them connect with those people. And this also can happen at any stage. So it can happen while a young person's still in foster care, it can happen when they're out of foster care. Ideally, you want it as soon as possible at the point of homelessness. Okay, you can review the stats are good. Okay, it works, the program works, the connections work. Couple of just quick little things because we're out of time, but how to build trust. I do like to give actual tangible things of how to build trust. Eat with young people. Everybody knows this. Eat, provide food, not just pizza. Kids are very clear. They don't want pizza. They want food, proper food, good food. Allow your workers to ace the test. So this is when a young person says, hey, will you meet me at 7 a.m. on Saturday morning and go trampolining with me? That was a real request. And this is, the worker's like, what? You don't even get up at 7 a.m. What are you talking about, right? That's a young person testing their worker to say, or testing their support people to say, does this person care? Does this person give a shit? And this is an important piece. So allowing your workers to be able to do that, creating support around them to be able to actually ace that test so that they can develop the relationships, so they can make new relationships. Take a whatever it takes approach. And this one is really important to us, and we didn't really get into it, but young people from the foster care system have, if Francesca will let me have one more minute. Yes? Okay. Young people, I think this is just one important piece. Young people from foster care have missed so much in that childhood point, right? And we call it filling the bucket. There's lots of different terms for this, but basically, young people have missed out on critical nurturing moments in their life as they've grown up. And what ends up happening is that we, once we get involved later on in their life, some of those behaviors can be seen as they're depending on us for certain things. So for an example, an 18-year-old saying you need to drive me to my appointment, or can you register for me for this event or whatever it is, or the soccer team or whatever. And a lot of people in our space say, if we do this for them, we're going to enable them. They're going to become dependent on us, right? That is what we often say. We think about it. We're like, we need to make them independent. We absolutely need to make them independent. But it's missing that critical piece, which is that if you haven't actually had your bucket filled, if you haven't had these needs met during your lifetime, you actually won't progress from that developmental stage to the next stage without having that bucket filled. And so what we have to do is not as workers necessarily, but as the support network around the young person, is be able to fill that bucket for the young person, maybe do a little bit of that nurturing, the driving, the supporting, as some people refer to it as enabling, right? And be able to fill their bucket so that they can then reach that next developmental stage where they push against, and they, like the teenage years when you push against and you don't want to be around your adults. We want young people to be able to get to that place. And so I just challenge that whenever we think is this going to be enabling them to not be independent in the future, it's something that we think about. Support executive functioning and reminding young people that you're there, driving them to appointments, picking them up from appointments, and communicating success. So, when you're reminding them and stuff, you don't say I know you're going to forget, but I want to remind you, but rather I'm super excited to see you, right? And just communicating success and having staff communicate success to young people. Try not to be a savior. And we talked a little bit about labeling, but a couple other random things that have worked really well in our program have been around if young people are not engaging, and a lot of young people from foster care will disconnect, will disengage with you through the course of involvement, is we have had some success in actually switching workers and saying, so we would say, that's okay, and another worker will reach out to that young person for a month to see if they'll re-engage with a different worker. We don't necessarily know why they're disengaging, but we have found a lot of success in that. Making the program attractive to the young people, not assuming that they're going to come to you because you're so great, right? But rather than saying, how are we going to make it attractive to them? So do we have Raptors tickets? Do we have housing subsidies? Do we have cool things going on? Because developmentally, they shouldn't actually be wanting to hang out with random adults, right? They should, right? There should be something else driving them to you, and that's okay. And if they're being driven to you because of you're going to we're going to go to the Raptors game or something, that's okay, because then you can start working with them in different ways, in different capacities. Having staff with lived experience in the foster care system obviously is very helpful and very supportive, and kids come to that. And I could do a whole thing on child protection and how to work with child protection workers, but I think we'll just pretty much end with that, except for this one. And this is if you catch yourself thinking, this young person's not motivated, they're lazy, they should be old enough to do that. If I do it for them, how will they learn? This youth is not appropriate for the program. They don't comply. We should reduce expectations. I want you to say to yourself, what are you missing in the program? What are we not doing? What needs are unmet for the young person? Because a lot of young people from foster care fall into this first category, and they get dismissed from organizations. They get discharged because they say they're not motivated, right? Or they don't actually want to show up. If they wanted to show up, they'd show up. But we know with kids from foster care, it's way more complicated than that, and that we have to kind of shift the way we're supporting. So I went way over time. Sorry, everyone. Thank you so much, and I guess we're doing questions. Thanks.
I'm going to see, does this work? Does it work? Okay, good. For the people that are not here in person and virtual, we need to use the mic for our question and answers. So I will come to you if you have any questions. We did go a little bit over, but that's fine. You've got more information to ask less questions. Yes, I'm going to pass it to the floor. If anybody has a question, I will come to you.
20 minutes is short.
Thanks for all your presentations today. They were great. I'm thinking about youth, Danny, who have been exploited. And they may or may not have come from the foster care system. But these are youth that, due to the experiences that they've had, often have behaviors that others find very difficult to manage. So, substance misuse, aggressive behaviors, like Heather, you were just saying that they're lazy, they don't want to participate in the program. And what happens with these youth is that they then get discharged from the program that they are part of. And then that just, reinforces the cycle. They're back into potential homelessness and higher risk of being exploited. And I am one of those child protection people. But so that's something that we find with these youth. And so it's so hard to break that cycle when they are continually being discharged from programs or not accepted into programs that would provide them with safe housing. And so I just kind of wanted to get your sense of how we solve that problem in 30 seconds or less. Thanks.
I think she said both your names. Yeah. It's just not me. Oh, I wasn't listening to your question. Danny's got it.
All right. So I think that's part of the reason why we really started to work on the dedicated supports and services, because the level of resiliency and understanding that needs to come with exactly everything you mentioned in regards to behaviors and so forth. We take a shelter setting, for example, like showing up to your housing rights workshop or whatever it is, not to mitigate those because they're very important, but seriously, you know what I mean? Like they're not going to be able to meet you where you're at or where your program's at. So you have to take a completely different approach. Even when the individual comes to us in their most raw form, whether we try arts-based interventions and supports and therapy, but you have to start small. You have to be able to be resilient and take some of that. That's why I say you really have to work on the structure and the responses within the organization to recognize we may have, it's important to have rules and expectations and so forth, but you also have to create an environment where this individual can come down off of their trauma, right? In a safe space and allow for that, whether that be prioritizing treatment when they're ready or so forth, but really sitting back and letting them be. Because if they're showing you those behaviors, they're getting comfortable with you. Because otherwise, why would they come to your program, right? So.
No, that was great. And one thing I was going to add is we've had to just use different terminology. We don't close a file. Kids are either active with us or not. And if they want to stroll back in after a few months or their situation gets so frustrating or desperate, there's no complication to reactivating a file.